The office building was bustling as usual, with people heading to their respective floors. James, a man in his early 40s, waited quietly in the corner of the lobby near the elevator. He sat in a sleek, motorized wheelchair, dressed in a sharp suit that hinted at his professionalism. The elevator dinged, and James positioned himself to enter. As he rolled in, a woman behind him huffed loudly. Seriously?" she muttered, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. James glanced back briefly, catching sight of the woman, a tall, well-dressed blonde with an impatient expression. She stepped in after him, tapping furiously at the buttons. "Are you going to take forever in here?" she snapped. James blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" "I said," she emphasized. "Are you going to take forever? People have places to be, you know." She crossed her arms and sighed dramatically, as though his presence alone was a personal inconvenience. James stayed calm, his face betraying no emotion. "I'm just going to the 15th floor, he said evenly. "Great. Just great," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. As the elevator doors slid shut, the hum of the machinery filled the enclosed space. James sat silently, his hands resting lightly on the arms of his wheelchair, while the woman behind him shifted restlessly. Her energy was palpable, impatient, irritated, and heavy with unspoken judgment. The elevator began its smooth ascent, but the atmosphere inside felt anything but smooth. The woman let out an exaggerated sigh, muttering just loudly enough to ensure James could hear her. "This is why they should have separate elevators for, you know." Her words trailed off, but her pointed glance at James said more than enough. James turned his head slightly, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "For what exactly?" he asked, his voice steady and polite, though there was a quiet strength behind his question. The woman hesitated, as if caught off guard by his directness. But instead of backing down, she pursed her lips and doubled down. "For wheelchairs," she said bluntly, gesturing toward him with a vague wave of her manicured hand. "It's just inconvenient for everyone else." James's eyes lingered on her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. He felt the familiar sting of her words, though he had grown used to this kind of ignorance over the years. It didn't hurt any less, but he had learned to mask the pain. "I see," he replied simply, his tone measured and polite. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the unspoken tension between them. The woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other, glancing at her watch, as though she couldn't endure another second in the elevator. The elevator slowed to a halt on the 10th floor and the doors slid open. A small group of office workers stepped in, their conversations halting as they took in the scene. They exchanged curious glances, sensing the discomfort that hung in the air like a cloud. James greeted the newcomers with a polite nod, his composure unshaken. Meanwhile, the woman stood rigidly to one side, her irritation now mingled with discomfort. She tapped her foot impatiently, as if willing the elevator to move faster. James sat quietly, his face calm but his thoughts racing. He wasn't angry. He had long since learned that anger rarely solved anything. But there was a weight in his chest, the familiar ache of being reduced to an inconvenience in someone else's eyes. As the elevator resumed its ascent, James glanced briefly at the woman. He didn't say another word, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. It wasn't anger or frustration, but something far more powerful, a quiet dignity that refused to be diminished by her small-mindedness. The woman, however, refused to meet his gaze, choosing instead to stare resolutely at the numbers lighting up above the doors. The awkward ride continued, each passing floor feeling like an eternity. The elevator slowed to a halt, and the soft chime of the bell announced their arrival on the 15th floor. James rolled his wheelchair forward with practiced ease, his face composed despite the lingering tension. As he exited, he caught the faint sound of the woman behind him exhaling dramatically, her irritation as obvious as it was uncalled for. "Finally," she muttered under her breath, the disdain dripping from her words. She shook her head, her exasperation evident in her body language. James stopped for a moment just outside the elevator, his hand lightly gripping the joystick of his wheelchair. He turned slightly to look back at her, his expression calm but his eyes sharp, a quiet strength behind them. "Have a nice day," he said, his voice neutral yet carrying a subtle edge that hinted he had not missed her behavior. The woman barely acknowledged him, her eyes already glued to her phone as she furiously typed away, likely venting her frustration to someone else. Her dismissiveness stung, but James chose not to dwell on it. Turning away, he straightened his posture and rolled forward, his focus shifting to the task ahead. The hallway stretched before him, its polished floors gleaming under the soft overhead lights. At the end of the corridor stood a set of double doors, their sleek design a testament to the importance of what lay beyond. Above them, a sign read in bold modern lettering, Executive Suite, CEO Office. James's gaze lingered on the sign for a moment. It was a reminder of how far he had come and the battles he had fought, not just as a person with a disability, but as a leader, a visionary, and a professional who had earned his place at the top. The weight of the encounter in the elevator still hung in the back of his mind, but he pushed it aside. He had dealt with ignorance before, and he would likely deal with it again. But here, in this space, he wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was in charge. As he approached the doors, they swung open automatically, revealing the bustling energy of his executive team. Heads turned as he entered, and greetings of "Good morning, Mr. Collins" echoed warmly through the office. James gave a small nod, a faint smile playing on his lips as he rolled confidently toward his desk. Behind him, the elevator doors closed, leaving the woman to exit at her own pace, still blissfully unaware of the revelation waiting just ahead. The woman sat frozen in her chair as James rolled to the head of the conference table, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. James's sharp gaze didn't waver as he adjusted his position slightly, folding his hands in front of him. He took in the woman's wide eyes and pale face, the way her carefully curated confidence had crumbled in an instant. He'd seen that look before, a mix of embarrassment and panic that often followed moments of thoughtless behavior. "Good afternoon," James said, his tone even and professional, though a hint of steel underpinned his words. "I understand you're here for an interview?" The woman's polished exterior was gone, replaced by a stammering attempt to find words. I didn't realize," she began, her voice faltering. James raised an eyebrow, his expression calm but pointed. "Didn't realize what?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to demand honesty. "That the person you were so impatient with in the elevator happens to be the CEO of this company?" As her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, James allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the countless moments in his life when people had underestimated him, dismissed him, or reduced him to nothing more than his wheelchair. He had fought hard to get to where he was, through grit, determination, and a refusal to let other small-mindedness define him. Watching her now, he felt no anger. He had learned long ago that anger rarely led to change. But he wasn't going to let her behavior slide either. Moments like these weren't just personal. They were teachable. The woman's eyes darted around the room as though looking for an escape. Her carefully planned responses, her rehearsed charm, none of it seemed to matter now. I didn't mean," she finally muttered, her voice barely audible. James tilted his head slightly, his expression neutral but unyielding. "Didn't mean what?" he pressed gently, giving her a chance to confront her actions. "Didn't mean to make assumptions? Didn't mean to dismiss someone you didn't know?" Her hands gripped the edge of her portfolio, her knuckles white. "I didn't know you were." She started but stopped abruptly, realizing the sentence wouldn't help her case. James leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor only heightening the tension. "You didn't know who I was," he finished for her, his voice steady. "But that's the problem, isn't it? You didn't think you needed to know. You made your judgment long before stepping into this room." The woman's face burned with shame. She opened her mouth to apologize, but James held up a hand, stopping her. "I'm not looking for excuses," he said firmly, his gaze softening just slightly. "What I am looking for is someone who understands the value of every individual, whether they're sitting at this table or riding in an elevator. This company prides itself on respect and integrity, and those values don't stop at the conference room door." The weight of his words hung in the air, the silence pressing down like a heavy blanket. James's eyes stayed on hers, not unkind but unrelenting, waiting for her to respond. James didn't allow the woman much time to regain her composure. He rolled smoothly to the head of the table, his every movement calm and deliberate. Though he wasn't standing, his presence was commanding, filling the room with quiet authority. He clasped his hands together and looked directly at her. "I believe people show their true character in how they treat others when they think no one's watching," he said, his voice even but with unmistakable weight. "Wouldn't you agree?" The woman nodded weakly, unable to meet his gaze. The confidence she'd carried so proudly earlier had completely crumbled. Her polished demeanor was now replaced by a mixture of shame and panic. James paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. Then he continued, his tone unwavering. "Our company values respect, empathy, and professionalism above all else. These aren't just words we put on a website, they're principles we live by every day. I'm afraid your behavior earlier doesn't align with those values." His words struck like a hammer. The woman's eyes welled with tears, the full weight of what she had done sinking in. "Mr. Collins, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I wasn't thinking, I didn't mean." James held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Apologies are a start," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "But actions speak louder. It's not about what you meant, it's about what you did. In those moments, you made choices that showed a lack of respect and understanding." The room was heavy with silence. James's words weren't loud, but their impact was undeniable. He wasn't speaking out of anger, he was speaking out of the belief that people could and should do better. Tears spilled down the woman's cheeks as she bowed her head. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James took a deep breath, softening his gaze just slightly. "I suggest you reflect on this moment," he said. "Not just for today, but moving forward. Take it as an opportunity to grow. For now, I think we're done here." The woman stood shakily, gathering her belongings with trembling hands. She didn't argue, didn't plead further. Instead, she walked toward the door, her head bowed in shame. As the door clicked shut behind her, the room fell silent once more. James let out a small sigh, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He had experienced moments like this too often. People who judged him based on their own assumptions, who failed to see beyond his wheelchair. It wasn't the first time, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But he also knew that moments like this had the power to teach. If nothing else, he hoped this woman would carry the lesson with her. That she would remember today not just as a failed interview but as a turning point, a reminder that respect isn't optional, and that every person, no matter their circumstances, deserves to be treated with dignity. James looked toward the window, the city skyline stretching out before him. Another day, another challenge, but also another chance to change perspectives, one person at a time. Thank you for watching this powerful story about respect, empathy, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever faced or witnessed a similar situation, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us create more meaningful and inspiring content. So don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the story. Subscribe to our channel to see more thought-provoking stories like this. Comment below to share your thoughts or experiences. We love hearing from you. And share this video with your friends and family to spread this important message. Together, we can make a difference by inspiring change, one story at a time. Thank you for being part of our journey.